This draft is just chaos from what I understand. Richmond hold all the keys and all the cards really, with about 8 picks inside 24 and 4 picks inside the top 11. So they're going to shape this draft massively.
This is the grand final day for teams like Richmond and North Melbourne and West Coast, I might add. Whereas for other teams who are in the mix, they're... for a team like Fremantle, for example, who probably did most of its work in the recent trade period by getting Shea Bolton across, it's important, but it's a different sort of a draft. So what are you expecting from West Coast and Fremantle first up? Who are they targeting? What sort of players?
Yeah, with the Eagles early on, I'm really expecting them to go for the best possible player, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but this draft is just chaos from what I understand. Richmond hold all the keys and all the cards really, with about 8 picks inside 24 and 4 picks inside the top 11. So they're going to shape this draft massively. And then for whatever's left is going to be picked over by the other clubs. West Coast, with that trade for Matt Owies and Liam Baker, dropped from 3 to 12, which obviously massively changes the way they go about this. From all reports and from people I talked to, they realistically love Bo Allen, the Peel Thunder midfielder and defender. But what I understand from that perspective is he's probably not going to get past Richmond's 10 or 11. So West Coast, there's a few names on the board. I wrote today in the paper, young small forward Joe Berry out of Victoria. He's a good chance. They really like him. I know they've got a plethora of small forwards, the Eagles, but he fits that new Andrew McQualter style of run, carry, speed and attack. And they can turn these guys into midfielders. We've seen a lot of these small forwards end up in the midfield. They've got Liam Baker who can run through the midfield as well. I think Matt Owies will be able to go through there a little bit as well. So I think there's going to be some different ways that they'll be able to change that. Job Shanahan, another big forward outside of that area from the Allies. I expect him to be around the mark. And then there's Xavier Lindsay, who both West Coast and Freo really like out of Victoria. Left footer, clearance machine, racks up the footy. Both Eagles and Dockers into him at about that range. So it's going to be interesting. And keep an eye on a guy like Luke Traynor, the best defender in this year's draft. Had a bit of injuries towards the end of the year, has slipped down the pecking order a little bit amongst some people. There's some really good midfielders in this draft that people are looking at, the clubs are looking at, sorry. I expect him to maybe be around the Eagles' second pick, which could push out to 30, 32.
Two things. Well, obviously they're in need of defensive depth, the Eagles, having lost Barras, and it's really an area that they need to address. Can the Eagles, would you expect them to trade up a bit?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think every club is actually looking, outside of, the few that we mentioned earlier, Richmond and North Melbourne, are looking to trade up. I know Adelaide, who are at pick 4, they're looking at North Melbourne's pick 2. Richmond are looking at North Melbourne's pick 2 and could have 1 and 2 in this year's draft, which would be extraordinary. North, we know, are shopping that around to see what else they can get into next year and this year, because it's such a strong draft. Clubs are willing to overpay. So there's multiple ways we could see this happen, but I'm curious to see who goes up. West Coast, I know, are trying as well. I'm not sure Fremantle are as much. I think they're happy to hold their hand for next year as they look to try and bring in Chad Warner, who's the big fish.
So Freo, what are the expectations about what sort of player does Freo need in this draft?
This is the interesting one, Quarters, I find with Fremantle. They've got so much depth across every line. I think in this year's draft, they can just pick the best possible young talent that's actually available at them. They don't need a young forward. They don't need a young midfielder, a half back, a small defender. They've got a lot of depth.
Don't need a ruckman.
They don't need ruckman, that's for sure. So I honestly think they're going to actually just wait and see what happens. And I reckon they're probably in the position where they can just pick the best young kid, no matter what position that is left at that point of the draft. And speaking to some recruiters, speaking to some list managers, speaking to managers of players, no one knows what's going to happen in this year's draft. It's not like last year where we knew Harvey Reid was going to be one, and then there was a handful of players from then on in, and then it was a little bit more open. This is going to be open from pick 1 onwards. We're still not sure who's going first, so Fremantle could end up with a real surprise back at pick 15. It's also why clubs are opening up a lot of picks late on in the draft, because Brisbane were expecting a bid for Levi Ashcroft and Sam Marshall, Gold Coast for Leo Lombard. So there's a few aspects there where those picks that are, West Coast in 92, for example, that can come massively into the late 50s, early 60s. And clubs are wondering if there's a good player that might just happen to slip through the cracks.
And of course, this year's the first year that clubs outside those northern states, frontier teams, are able to match bids round 1 for their NGA talent. So Malakai Champion being a great example. Your information is that you've written that West Coast will match a bid on him.
Yep, so I can confirm West Coast have told his management and him that, yep, they will take him in this week's draft. Depending on who you speak to, some believe he'll go there might be a bid in the second round. Others are saying that he could slip all the way out and be picked up as a Category B rookie. That, again, this is just that kind of draft. A lot of information that's coming out. There's different people hearing a lot of different things. But what we can confirm is that we expect West Coast to match whatever bid comes their way for Malakai Champion. So expect him in an Eagles jumper. We've seen him at training already over the season. 7 goals in 5 games at league level for Subiaco. 3 on debut against West Coast Waffle side of all teams. Fantastic under-18s campaign. 2nd in the 20-metre sprint at the National Draft Combine, 5th in the agility test. He's a speedster, real crafty young man. Definitely a development player. I don't expect him to play a lot of AFL footy in his first couple of years, but I do expect him to be one of those guys that will really develop under what is a plethora of small forwards already at West Coast, in the likes of Liam Ryan, Matt Owies, and Jamie Cripps.
So is he purely a forward, or is there a possibility of developing that tank and going through the midfield?
I actually think there is the possibility of him being able to go and pinch hit in the midfield, a bit like what Willie Rioli did in that 2018 premiership season, where he obviously played predominantly as a small forward, but was able to go into those centre square bounces and pinch hit and really give you that X factor and speed. He's got a great burst of speed. He's an elite tackler, and he's just a fantastic ball user and a great vision. And from the interviews that I've had with him and speaking to people around him, he's just a fantastic young man who wants to work on his game and is really dedicated. So, look, I expect him to be able to actually change and become more of a midfielder as time goes on, especially under, like I said, McQualter's new system of run and gun and attack.
So we mentioned earlier that we weren't sure who was going to go pick one, but let's start from the top of the list. Richmond, Sam Lalor, who's a medium forward midfielder, 187 centimetres from the Rebels, from the Bacchus Marsh, that Western Districts of Melbourne area. What do you think he'll go one?
Yeah, that's the word out of Melbourne right now, isn't it? That Lalor's going to go one. I expect him to be definitely around that mark. It depends on what Richmond want to do. If they do end up trading pick 6 at a future pick for North Melbourne's pick 2, it could shape the draft completely. And they could pick another guy at 1. I don't expect them to put an early bid on Levi Ashcroft. I think they should, but I don't expect them to. But yeah, I reckon Lalor probably a definite strong chance for 1. And then 2 is where it gets really interesting.
Finn O'Sullivan. So the player all Eagles fans wanted. Cousin of Walsh, Sam Walsh. So Carlton's into him, but North Melbourne looks likely to get him. 182 centimetre midfielder from Oakley Chargers. From all reports, just a jet.
Yeah, a contested beast, really clean hands overhead. Like you said, Sam Walsh's second cousin. He's a really good player. He's been touted for a long time, had a bit of injuries here and there, but is just a jet. It's one of the classy midfielders of this draft, and I expect him to go definitely in that top 5. Carlton interested as well, but they've also had a real big go and a big look at Sid Draper from South Australia, which confirms that Michael Voss has actually spoken to him as well. So that's going to be interesting what Carlton do with that pick 3 that they obviously got in from West Coast.
And Jagga Smith, a midfielder, 181 centimetres from Oakley Chargers.
Yeah, I really like Smith. I think he's got a good turn of pace. I think he's got some really good skills, can go forward. I think he could probably start life across half-back, and what a name too. If he gets over here,
good headline name, Mitch.
Moves like Jagga. Works, doesn't it, Quarters? The old editor's hat goes on. But no, look, I really like the way he goes about it. I think he would have definitely been in the realm for pick 3 had West Coast been around. I think Finn O'Sullivan and him were definitely on their radar, as well as Sid Draper.
And another one, Harvey Langford from the Dandenong Stingrays, another midfielder, 190 centimetres, nice size.
Yeah, he's the big body midfielder, the same sort of abilities as a Bo Allen from Peel Thunder. They're a similar type of player, real composed young men, able to work really well. So yeah, I expect him to be around the mark too. But geez, these midfielders, they were defenders back in the day on ruckman Quarters, and now they're big body midfielders at 190 centimetres, and their abilities to go forward, to go back, they've got so many different ways they can play, these young men. So look, expect him to be definitely in the top 5, if not the top 8.
Let's finish off with a Western Australian angle. So who are we expecting to go? We saw some comments made from the East Coast earlier in the year. This could be the year no one's drafted. Well, that was utter nonsense, because we know Bo Allen's an absolute Monty to go. How many do you reckon? And just give us a few of the leading names out there.
I'm expecting at least 8 in the first 3 days, closer to probably 10, I think. So Bo Allen's definitely a first-round lock. He's been invited to Melbourne for Wednesday night, so he'll head over in the next 24 hours, I believe, and he'll be part of that 17 that'll be there for the first night, which is really exciting. Hugh Boxall, Didn't get a national draft combine. The Claremont midfielder averaged about in the 20s for the Colts this year at the Tigers in their premiership side. He's bolted in. I expect him to be around the second round mark. I think he's fantastic. Cale Jarine, big West Perth forward ruck, a big man, physically ready. It's one of those things I think you can't teach, which is real aggression. Likes to hit packs, likes to tackle, and is a really skilled for his size at 199 centimetres, probably a little undersized for a ruckman these days. I think he's going to find life better as a forward, but I think he'll definitely be a forward ruck. I expect him around the mark of the second round. And speaking to some sources today, Hamish Davis, don't expect him to get too far as well outside of that second round. And then you've got some other guys that are really coming through. Cody Angove's a small forward from Claremont. I think he'll be around the mark in the late second, early third. Will Hayes, fantastic runner, wingman forward, same sort of area. And then you've got some mature guys. Lockie Blackiston from East Fremantle, 26-year-old, was only playing for Coburn Cobras 4 years ago in C3 Ammos. And St Kilda flew him east a few weeks ago to put him through for a medical and their own little draft combine. I expect him to be picked up as a mature age ruckman. And I think, Glenn, we're going to see this in the next few years. I think we're going to see more and more ruckmen about 24 to 27 be picked up and be thrown into the AFL system. I think we're going to see less ruckmen at the age of 18, 19 picked up. I reckon they're going to be left in state leagues or put in development leagues or even just rookied and hidden away for years until they're physically ready. Because we're seeing now what, those 27-year-old, 28-year-old ruckmen with only 30 games under their belt can come in and have an impact straight away. So I think he's going to be the start of this new wave of the way clubs look at recruiting their big men. So Lockie Blackiston, keep an eye out for that name. West Coast have an interest in Michael Selwood, Peel Thunder defender, a 21-year-old, intercept defender, medium size. I expect him to be looked at pretty heavily. Corey Tregenza out of their premiership side as well as a young forward. He's pretty impressive. Wouldn't be the worst option if Fremantle threw him a rookie lifeline just to add a bit of cover for their forward depth. He's a good third tall forward. I know they've got Pat Voss and Jay Amos and Josh Tracy, but we know that the injuries do happen and they've lost Tabiner, Sabit Quek and Josh Corbett. So he wouldn't be such a bad little cover as a, third, fourth tall forward in the waiting. Sits in Peel Thunder for the year, doesn't really hurt anybody. There's just so many good young players around at the moment, especially in the mature age sense.
Denver Grainger-Barras, any interest in him? He's been delisted by Hawthorn, perhaps rookied somewhere later on?
Yeah, I'm hearing Carlton. He'll definitely train with them over the summer for a train-on. I can't see why West Coast shouldn't give him a shot. I think they need defensive depth, as we spoke about before. They've lost Tom Barras. They've only got 4 key defenders on their list. One of them is the reigning John Worsfold medalist in Jeremy McGovern, but he turns, I think, 33 in April. So, and still playing fantastic footy, but out of contract at the end of next year and in the twilight of his career, albeit how good it's going. So, look, I couldn't see why they wouldn't look at him. Will Collins, a Swan Districts defender, was on West Coast list. He's also put his hand up for the draft, had a fantastic year. He could be another option to actually come back to West Coast and just be a bit of defensive cover. I've been a big advocate for another Swan in Jake Piscini. I know Harrison McCready from East Perth, another defender's also put his hand up for the draft just to see what happens. So there's a couple of mature age defenders there that might be able to come in and just, even if they're rookie listed, just be able to help out cover those little areas. But other than that, you've got, like we said, you've got your Malakai Champion, Clancy Dennis, the All-Australian centre-half back from Claremont. Collingwood have a real interest in him. Unfortunately, he didn't test at the National Draft Combine with another foot injury. He's had navicular injuries in both of his feet, but Collingwood really like the way he's going about it. Tom Bell out of South Fremantle, only his first real full year at footy, and West Coast have taken a liking to him. They expect him to go at some stage, if not as a rookie, maybe a little bit late in the draft. And then throughout there's another number of other options. Luke Urquhart from East Fremantle's a midfielder. The only knock on him is his kicking, but he's a ball magnet, just racks it up. And I would love to see him get a chance. I think you can fix kicking. I don't think you can, teach some of the stuff that he's got, and it's that will to compete and that hard work. So, look, I don't think it's going to be as dire as the predictions were earlier this year. Is it going to be the WA's best draft crop? I don't think so. But it's not going to be one player. It's not going to be Bo Allen or bust. There's plenty out there, like we've already said.